and welcome back everybody. I'm going to continue with chapter 7, which I've titled The Corpse, and this is part 3. So, going to launch straight into it. Brenda presented herself next for the polygraph. In her statement, she indicated that it was Zanelli who had found the bed empty. Zanelli had found the patient in the restroom. At this stage, we were interrupted by a knock on the door. I opened it to find the matron there, and she beckoned me outside. She whispered to me that the patient had not been able to walk without a walker for 10 years, and she was not sure if this was an important fact or not. I told her it was an extremely important fact and thanked her. She asked me if I needed anything, such as coffee or water, and I reassured her that I was okay. She told me that someone would bring my lunch tray up within an hour. I went back into the office and smilingly apologized to Brenda and asked her to carry on telling me what happened that night. She said that the nurses had split up when Zanelli had found the bed empty, and that Zanelli at some point had yelled from the restroom, "He's in here." I asked her if those were the exact words, because I remembered that Zanelli had said Brenda had just screamed from the ICU that the bed was empty. She said that they had looked for the patient for 20 minutes. Of course, I knew at this point that both nurses were lying. The stories already did not add up. When a truthful story is told, it is like a spider's web. Each strand is perfectly in place. When a story of deceit and fabrication is told, the spider's web becomes irregular due to the made-up strands, and then the teller must add in more false strands in order to hold up the entire web, and in the end it is an uneven, lopsided mess that makes no sense. I allowed Brenda to ramble on. Her version was that the nurses had placed the deceased patient onto a stretcher and then wheeled him to the bed and placed him onto it while they waited for a doctor. She told me that the patient had been found lying with his face pressed into the wall. She gave the time as about 4 a.m. After she finished talking, I was silent. I allowed her to sit, marinating in her own lies for a few seconds, before I said to her, "Brenda, the patient had walked with a walker for 10 years. You are a nurse. Help me to understand how this patient, who was clearly critical at the time, would be able to walk down a passage without his walker." Brenda stared at me for a short while, and then she said to me she now remembered that the patient had indeed been standing in the bathroom leaning on his walker, and that is how he had died. I asked her if she was sure that he was still standing when they found him, even though he was deceased. She assured me that this was the case. Barely containing my laughter at this ludicrous story, I asked her why this differed so much from her first version. She told me she was confused. I told her I did not need any medical training to know that when somebody died, they would fall over because the muscles no longer functioned. Rigor mortis takes about 4 hours to set in, according to Google. Maybe somebody in the medical field can correct me. Her reply to me was, "If you say so." As expected, Brenda failed her test too. Brenda left the office wearing what I had termed the look of defeat, which I talked about in the first chapter, and lunch was served to me by a young lady who introduced herself as Shireen. It was a balanced meal of vegetables and a T-bone steak. I added my roll and yogurt to the mix, and I knew I would not be hungry again for a good few hours. Numsa bounced into the office next, clearly without a care in the world. She greeted me cheerfully and did not seem fazed at all at my more composed greeting. She plonked down in the chair and asked me to wait while she switched her phone off. It is imperative that I remain in control during the proceedings, so I said to her I would start while she switched her phone off and asked her for her name, pen at ready to write it down. She spelt it out for me, Numsa Mpande. Once she had put her phone in her handbag with some fanfare, she told me that we could begin. Once I started taking her statement, I also asked her to tell me what happened that night. She took in a deep breath and began at the point where she had heard Zanelli screaming. I was acutely aware that the nurses had not decided on who supposedly found the deceased patient when they concocted their story. I did not interrupt her at all while she spoke, of running down the passage to the restroom and Zanelli saying over and over again that the patient was deceased. I watched her face unblinkingly as she described how the 4 nurses had carried the patient back to his bed. She ended by saying, "That is what happened." I asked her in an utterly monotone voice if they had all been sleeping and woke up to find the patient dead. She denied this. I told her that the patient had been unable to walk without his walker for a decade. She replied she had not seen the walker. I asked her how they had carried the patient back to the bed, to which she replied it was on a stretcher. She said that the time was about 3:50 a.m. and that she had indicated as much in the patient's files. I reminded her that filling in incorrect information on a patient's files amounted to fraud. She agreed with me wholeheartedly. I explained to her that the patient's family was stricken and that hopefully she would never be in this situation and that she needed to tell the truth. She would not budge from her version of events. I was learning again how in the black culture, to be an impimpi, which means an informant, was the worst possible thing to be. If one of the nurses had been white, the chances of a confession would have increased. So I just want to stop there. The black culture, I do find it very advanced, and it is different in the working world to white people. White people fold almost instantly. Tell them they're facing arrest, immediately they'll throw everybody under the bus. Not so with the predominant culture in South Africa. Strong, loyal, and sometimes that loyalty is not for the benefit of themselves, but often it is. I do enjoy the loyalty of the black culture, the way they stand up for each other. It's called Ubuntu basically, and they have each other's backs. Let me continue. Finally, Molly sat before me. Molly was the 4th nurse. Before I commenced the proceedings, I sighed deeply enough to convey to her that I was feeling dejected. As she gave me her name, I had to ask her to speak up as she spoke in barely above a whisper. This is a common trend amongst liars. Not always, but I have found in my personal experience during my career that when people lie or are about to lie, they will lower their voices. They think that this will be a countermeasure to my polygraph because I use voice stress testing. She told me her version of events with me asking her frequently to speak up, which she refused to do. She told me of how she heard Zanelli screaming, "He is not in the bed." She said she had not run to the ICU ward, but had immediately run to the exit door of the frail care to see if the patient had walked out into the passage unnoticed. In answer to my question, she said that the patient had been sitting slumped against the wall when she and her colleagues had found him in the restroom and they had placed him in a wheelchair to take him back to his bed. So we've got them carrying him, we've got them putting him on a stretcher, and now it was a wheelchair. In response to the issue of the walker, she said that often people had a burst of unexplained energy shortly before they died. I had no medical knowledge, but I found it difficult to believe that a man who had gone into cardiac and respiratory arrest a few hours earlier would have been strong enough to walk down a passage unaided for the first time in a decade to a restroom and then passed away there. She gave the time of them finding the body at 4:05 a.m. From the results of all the polygraphs, which indicated all the nurses were being deceptive, I deduced that the patient had been fetched quietly by the angels as he lay comfortable and warm in his bed, with the nurses peacefully and illicitly sleeping at reception. At the end of that particular report, which I forwarded via email the following day, I added a note which stated as much. The client did not ever come back to me, probably due to the sensitivity of the case, so I cannot be sure if the family found some peace. I was paid on the same day that I issued my invoice, and with that, my side of the case was closed. My next chapter is going to be chapter 8. It's a very short chapter, and it's called I'm Given a Remarkable Key. And there I speak about how I became involved in farmer tax. I was at the right place at the right time, was introduced to somebody who is one of the experts on farmer tax in South Africa, and he gave me a lot of work with polygraphs. And I'm going to be talking about farmer tax very, very soon. And obviously, everybody knows that farmer tax are a scourge in South Africa and that nothing is being done to stop them. So that's it for now. Have a great day. Have a great week. I'm very busy tomorrow. I'm fully booked with polygraphs. So good night for now.